Welcome to Recap Movies. Today we will explore a mysterious murder on a moving train. The challenge is to identify the killer before the train reaches the next station. Who is the killer? Can they find out, or will the mystery remain unsolved? The movie begins in Jerusalem in 1934. In the next scene we meet Hercule Poirot, a detective famous for solving every case he encounters. He is often compared to Sherlock Holmes. Poirot is a perfectionist who likes everything in perfect balance, even his breakfast eggs. A policeman approaches Poirot because a sacred sculpture has been stolen from a church. To solve the mystery, Poirot visits the sacred place and interrogates the three suspects. However, after revealing the truth, everyone is shocked. Policeman who called Poirot is real thief. After spending years solving different cases, Poirot intends to take a break and go on holiday to Istanbul. On the ferry, a woman named Mary Debenham sits beside him and admires his skills and attention to detail, which have impressed everyone. On the ferry, Dr. Arbuthnot and Mary are talking to each other, saying that when all of this is over, no one would touch them. Mr. Poirot overhears their conversation, and they both leave upon his arrival. After arriving in Istanbul, Poirot meets his friend Mohammed, who is a chef, and a businessman named Bouc. Poirot is approached by a representative of the British consulate while he enjoying with friends. He gives the message that he's required to report to London to solve a case. After receiving the message, he informs Bouc that he will be traveling on the same train with him. Poirot was informed by a consulate member that his travel arrangements were successfully completed. He would be traveling on a first-class luxury train with only a few passengers, including Princess Dragomirov, businessman Mr. Ratchet, and his servants, Mr. Masterman and Mr. McQueen. Also present on the train were Mrs. Mary Debenham and Dr. Arbuthnot. As the train departs Istanbul, Mr. Ratchet receives a threatening letter. He asks McQueen about it, but McQueen has no idea who could have sent it. Ratchet then tries to speak with Mrs. Hubbard, but she doesn't like him and they argue. Poirot overhears and asks if everything is all right, but Mrs. Hubbard dismisses his concern, and Poirot returns to his cabin. The next morning, Bouc welcomes everyone in the dining area, and Poirot joins him for lunch. Bouc tells Poirot about the various passengers on board. After the passengers leave the dining cabin, Mr. Ratchet approaches Poirot and asks if he can sit beside him. Poirot agrees, and Ratchet invites him for dessert. During their conversation, Ratchet reveals that he recently started an antiques business and, due to his unfair practices, has made many enemies. He mentions selling carpets in Milan, where the buyers were unhappy with the quality and are now demanding their money back. Ratchet asks Poirot for protection and offers him a large sum of money, but Poirot declines the offer. Ratchet also tries to threaten Poirot with a gun, but Poirot is not afraid at all and says Ratchet deserves the consequences for selling fake copies of originals. That night, Poirot feels a disturbance in Ratchet's cabin and sees a lady in a scarlet gown hurriedly leaving. Before he can act, the train is derailed by an avalanche during a thunderstorm. Along with the other passengers, Poirot finds his belongings damaged and is saddened to see a broken picture of his long-lost love, Catherine. As the train is stuck, passengers start to panic and question Bouc about the safety measures. He assures them that if they do not reach the next station on time, a rescue team will be sent. A missionary, Pilar Estravados, remarks that it's not in their hands to decide whether they will reach their destination or not. In the morning, Mr. Masterman knocks on Mr. Ratchet's cabin but gets no response. Mr. Poirot, from the adjacent cabin, joins him, and they call the guards to unlock the door. Mr. Poirot breaks the lock with his stick. They are shocked to find Ratchet's dead body and immediately call Dr. Arbuthnot, who confirms that Ratchet has been stabbed multiple times and estimates the time of death between midnight and 2 a.m. The duty guard informs them that he did not see anyone entering or leaving Ratchet's cabin. Bouc asks Poirot to help with the case. Initially, Poirot refuses, saying he is on vacation, but Bouc persuades him, arguing that an innocent person might be punished if the real culprit is not found. Poirot agrees to take the case, promising Bouc he will find the murderer. The investigation begins with Mr. McQueen, Ratchet's secretary, who handles most of his business. McQueen says he has worked with Ratchet for almost a year and describes him as a rude person with many enemies who sent him threatening letters. After questioning McQueen, Poirot examines the body and finds that Ratchet was drugged, preventing him from struggling. Despite having a gun under his pillow, Ratchet couldn't defend himself. Poirot also collects other evidence from the room, including a napkin with the letter H on it as the rescue crew arrives to help the train. While looking at the letters found in his room, Poirot finds a note saying, "Strong blood is on his hands, and he will die." Although he solves the puzzle, he tells Bouc that Ratchet's original name was not Ratchet, but Cassetti, and this case is linked to a previous Colonel Armstrong case, whose daughter, Daisy, was kidnapped and killed by Cassetti. The news came as a shock to his pregnant wife, Sonia, who lost her life along with the baby. Armstrong wrote a letter to him to seek his help, but it was too late as he was found dead with a gunshot wound. Poirot thinks the letter hints towards Daisy Daisy Armstrong's blood that was on Cassetti's hands. While questioning Mrs. Hubbard again, he asks whether she knows about Daisy Armstrong's case, and she admits hearing about it as it was quite a famous case. She hands over a button, saying the stranger who came into her room dropped it, and Poirot recognizes it from a security guard's uniform. Continuing the investigation, Poirot questions Mr. Masterman, Pilar Estravados, Hardman, the professor of engineering, and Mr. Marquise, an Italian automobile dealer, but can't find any clue. He calls Mary and asks about Cassetti, but she does not know him well. However, when Poirot asks her about her relationship with Dr. Arbuthnot, she says nothing in response, but Poirot heard them talking on the ferry. Then he goes to Princess Dragomirov and asks about Armstrong's case, and she says she was an admirer of Sonia Armstrong's mother, Linda Arden, who was a prolific actress. She also reveals that Daisy was her granddaughter. He tells her that Cassetti was the one who killed Daisy, but she says it could be a coincidence. Poirot does not believe her, but without reacting to anything, asks permission to talk to her assistant, who tells him she saw a conductor last night, but it was not Michelle, the one appointed in their cabin. After listening to this, he takes her and Bouc with him to find the guard's uniform, which might be hidden in the cabin somewhere, but finds it in his own luggage. While discussing the case with Bouc, he tells him Cassetti's account details are missing. Meanwhile, they find a man running on the bridge below the train and burning some documents. Poirot chases him and finds out it's McQueen. Poirot accuses him of stealing money from Cassetti and says that he killed him and burned his records so no one can find out about it. Mr. McQueen confesses to stealing money from Cassetti but denies killing him. He argues, "Why would I kill my cash cow? I can earn more money from him. Why kill him?" Dr. Arbuthnot interrupts the investigation and confirms that McQueen did not kill Cassetti as he was with him last night. When questioned about Mary, Arbuthnot says they met on a railway convoy. Poirot gets suspicious, as Mary had told him otherwise. Poirot confronts McQueen again and reveals information about his past. McQueen's father was the judge in the Armstrong case. McQueen explains that, lacking a suspect, his father was pressured to go after a poor French maid, Suzanne, who eventually killed herself. The maid was innocent, and by the time evidence pointed to Cassetti, he had disappeared. His father was punished for this failure, but McQueen, unable to help him, decided to study law to rectify his father's mistakes. Poirot accuses him of killing Cassetti out of revenge for his father's downfall, but McQueen denies it. As Poirot continues his investigation, he hears a scream and discovers that someone has stabbed Mrs. Hubbard in the back. The doctor rescues her, but Poirot concludes that the killer was trying to dispose of the murder weapon and that no fingerprints will be found. Poirot has investigated everyone except Count André and his wife, so he decides to question them as well. When he starts talking to them, he soon realizes that she has changed her name from Helena to Elena. She explains that they heard a napkin with an H was found in Cassetti's room and did not want to get into trouble. He discovers that she is Sonia's sister and was also involved in the Armstrong case. Due to that tragedy, she uses drugs to cope with her grief. The Count gets angry and pushes Poirot out of the room, but the engineer saves him. Poirot soon realizes the engineer is not who he pretends to be. When confronted, the engineer admits he is a detective hired by Cassetti to watch his back during the journey. Poirot reveals that he knows the engineer was a policeman before becoming a detective and asks him to leave and surrender the gun he was hiding in his coat. The next morning, Poirot invites Mary for further questioning. He accuses her of killing Cassetti because she was Daisy's governess. He suggests she murdered Cassetti and then called Helena to witness it, thinking it would help with her grief and possibly rekindle their friendship. As he investigates her, Dr. Arbuthnot shoots at him and confesses to killing Cassetti. He explains that John Armstrong was his best friend and commander, who had sent him to medical school and secured his future. However, Cassetti destroyed Armstrong, and Arbuthnot wanted to take revenge. However, he says due to his strong presence and governance, he will easily walk away, and killed him because he did not deserve a trial. He also confirms he tricked McQueen by mixing drugs in his drink and changing the time on the watch so no one could find out the time of death. While talking to him, Arbuthnot suddenly attacks Poirot, but Bouc arrives and saves him. As the passengers wait in the tunnel, Poirot says it's time to solve the case. He says Dr. Arbuthnot is not the killer because he could not even kill him. He tells them that the handkerchief they found with H is actually Russian and is pronounced as N and actually belongs to a princess whose actual name is Natalia Dragomirov. He also confirms that her assistant was involved, as she was previously a cook at Armstrong's house. He says it was Pilar who was in the room the night Cassetti abducted the child. Masterman also admits his link with Armstrong, revealing he was his Batman and also his valet in New York. Poirot discovers that the engineer fell in love with the maid who was falsely charged in Armstrong's case. He learns that the conductor Michel was Suzanne's brother and that Mrs. Hubbard is actually Linda Arden, who changed her appearance to aid in the murder. He finds out everyone on the train is linked to the Armstrong family in one way or another, and they were all affected by Daisy's murder. He finally reveals they did it together. Mrs. Hubbard admits it was her plan, and she recruited them to help her. They jointly killed Cassetti and removed the evidence, but she requests that Poirot tell the police she murdered him alone. She says they are good people and all deserve a second chance. Poirot can't decide who to blame in this case, nor can he lie about his true findings, so he asks them to kill him instead. Mrs. Hubbard picks up the gun and shoots herself instead, but finds it empty in the end. Poirot tells them he has informed the police that an unknown person killed Cassetti, and they are free to go. He steps down from the train, where an officer asks about him and says he is required to report to Egypt as there has been a murder along the River Nile. He agrees to go with him as the train leaves with all the other passengers. In the end, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this.